Hi, welcome to the Horse Workshop Part 2. On this one I'm going to be doing most of blocking in with soft pastel sticks. The one I'm using here is by Jackson's brand. That's the Jackson's art store. And I find them to be very compatible with other top brand pastels. Only they're usually, compared to those, a lot less expensive. And a little bit harder as well. If you compare them against something like the Unison or the Sennelier, they hold together a bit more, and I rather that personally. I don't like them so soft they just turn to powder straight away. Now the reason I'm using the sticks to block in, a couple of reasons really. Number one, obviously it saves my pencils. I say that in lots of videos. But number two, you really struggle to find a dark rich brown in pastel pencils. They don't have that punch at all. There's only a couple of brands like Caran d'Ache that have got some darkish, richish browns in there, but even then they don't compare really with this stick. If you put one next to each other, you'd see that the Caran d'Ache are actually a lot lighter in tone. So that's something I'm going to have to try and search for future supplies. Some really dark in the horse. You can see the dark reddy browns. I didn't really have that. They really are quite rare to find things like that in the pastels. Now I got hundreds of sticks. It wasn't in there. I've got hundreds of pencils. It wasn't in there either. And you would think that, you know, a dark rich reddy brown would be a colour that they would put in most sets, but obviously not. So I'm going to be doing my interpretation of this. I'm also going to be punching up a bit of the reds in the reference photo I'm working for. I'm not going to just duplicate it. I'm going to try and get a bit more detail of the horsehair actually in this, bit more texture, and keep a loose feel to it as well. I'm going to spend 1.5 hours doing this drawing, so I'm not going to take too long, and as I said, I'm going to keep it fairly loose but still realistic. So as I'm blocking in, I can tell you that I'm using the dark blue pastelmat paper, and the drawing's quite simple. I've just used white pastel pencil, just put a few lines down. It's not a difficult drawing at all. Now with the blocking in, I could just as easily have used pan pastels. I could have gone in with just pencils. I could have used the Conti sticks. As I said, it's all according to the colours that you've got in your sets. So I haven't put too much pastel down. I'm using my finger to push it as per usual into the pastel mat surface. Now I had a member on my Patreon channel the other day say to me they thought they'd ordered the wrong paper when they had pastel mat and it was smooth. If you're used to a sanded paper, pastel mat's going to feel smooth in comparison. It's only slightly textured, but even so it fills, or it holds the pastel really well. Pastel doesn't fill the tooth of the paper quickly. Now by that I mean if you're using a soft pastel in particular and you're using a rough sanded paper, it can have a habit of really pulling the pastel into the surface and wearing down the pastel sticks quickly, and it's filling the tooth of that sanded paper very quickly. And from my experiments and tests, I've found then that blending, you can't keep sharp edges, even though you'd expect to be able to do more and more layers with the rougher papers. I found them actually getting less. So pastelmat is still my prime paper. So you can see I'm carrying on using more sticks, and I'm just going to generally put in where I'm seeing browns, lighter browns, darker browns. Remember, I'm reserving my brightest highlights till last. I'll be putting my lighter colours on top of all this, but I'm making sure I'm not going too dark in areas that I want to be very light. But I'm not going to have, in the reference photo, a couple of areas are quite burnt out, and I'm going to try and put some more detail in those areas. So I'm going to speed the video up as I just carry on doing this process, basically putting in my under layer, which I'll then blend together. As you can see, that looks extremely messy at this stage, but all I'm trying to do is just create a base layer, so you don't have to worry about getting any of this too accurate at this stage. We can still put many layers on top, and you can see I'm using my fingers now, once again blending it all in. So really, it's really quite a thin layer that I've put down. You see I'm going in the direction that the hair is growing usually, and you see me do that more and more often as I start to layer on top. Clean finger then as I switched into the lighter tones. Fortunately we got usually lots of these fingers and thumbs, so I'm going to be cleaning all the time, but when I want to rub this pastel off my fingers, I've got that microfiber cloth in my lap. I just give them a quick wipe on there, and the fingers will still look dirty, but they won't transfer any of that over into lighter areas. So you can see that's the basic underlayer. I'm saving that white flash top left till last because I don't want that being contaminated. It's very white, I want to keep it that way. And now I've done that first layer, I can start to work a little bit more on refining it. So that's it pretty much for the underlayer on that section of the head. I'm going to work on the eye now. Now remember I said it's difficult to get hold of a really dark rich brown. It's also difficult to get hold of this kind of a red eye as well, a browny red eye that I've got in the reference. So I'm going to be mixing my colors up. I'm going to be using some reds, some browns, some blacks, because the most important part is tonal value, so that's the lights and the darks. That's what I want to get right to create the realism. The color will not be as critical, but I'm still going to try my best to get a realistic looking eye, and a lot of that will depend on the actual reflection and the highlight in the top section. But it's only really when you start doing a drawing or you start looking for the colors for your drawing that you kind of find that even though you may have a real massive set, there's still colors you won't have. So we still got to try our best then with the supplies that we've got. That's the beauty then of oil paints, my other medium, where I can mix very close to all the colors generally with just a few basic colors in my set. Now because I want more control, it's a smaller area, that's why I'm using the pencils a lot more actually on the eyeball itself. Once again, I could use the soft pastels, I could have used pan pastels. All the pastels are intermixable, so we just pick up what we think is the best tool for the job at the time. You can see that's the Caran d'Ache that I've got in my hand now, so it's worth getting, you know, just a couple of those. They are expensive, but the dark browns in particular are quite invaluable. I've gone to use them quite a lot on lots of my pastel drawings when I want that, you know, fairly rich, dark, deep brown. So that's the basics of the under layer done. That's the basic of the eyeball done as well. Now I'm going to be using a lot more pencils, starting to refine everything, starting to darken areas that need darkening and highlight areas that need that bright highlight on top. But because I've put this underlayer in, now I can start to see what needs to be adjusted much more easily. It's difficult when you've got a blank sheet of paper. If you started, say, top left and thought, right, I'm going to finish every little section as I work towards bottom right. Artists do it. I prefer to get an underlayer in just like I would with oil paints. That allows me to refine each layer as I go on top. As I said, I'm going to keep this kind of loose. We don't need to try and be hyper realistic all the time to create realism. Realism comes pretty much from the tonal values. We've all seen those things perhaps on films, on a scene that's lit with perhaps just a red light or a blue light or yellow light, and you've got the subject there, it could be a man or an animal, and they still look real, they still are real, but they're lit by, you know, an artificial light or an extremely unusual light, perhaps a sunset or sunrise, maybe a very red light. It's the tonal values that keeps that looking real to us, so that's what I'm concentrating on as I'm doing this. Putting my darks in first. You see I've got just seeing glances there of my hands, and I'm starting to build up a lot of pencils in my hand. I've got a bit of a habit of hoarding the ones that I'm trying out and using quite a lot. I keep them in my hand or close by, and by the end of a drawing I've usually got about 15 pencils in my hand and probably about 30 dotted around the table as well. Way too many for me to start giving out pencil coloured numbers. So you can see how I'm starting off by loosely putting in more refinement, the highlights, the darks, going in the direction I need to go with the hair growth. So it kind of curves around here. So I'm making sure I'm doing that, but I'm not going that light yet. If you squint at the screen and you look at the reference and you look at mine, you can see I've got a long way to go as far as adding highlights. I'm not going to go as bright as the reference. As I said, I'm going to put a bit more texture in my drawing. And look out for various colour hues and tints as well. You can see I'm using quite a darkish pink colour there, Carbothello pencil, even though it looks just grey on the reference. When I'm really studying that reference, I'm seeing other colours in there as well. Now this is real time, so you can see I'm not really hanging about either. I'm not trying to rush my drawing, but I'm trying to keep it a little bit looser than I do sometimes. And if you work slightly faster, that kind of forces you to look at the major elements, and that's what I'm doing at the moment. I'm really just looking at the major bits that need to go a lot lighter perhaps, or a lot darker, and refining those shapes. I'm just going to carry on doing that for a little while. Now I want this eye to have more of that red brown look, so I'm putting in a red that's a bit too punchy at the moment, but then I can add browns on top of it to calm that colour down. Use my little finger, just give it a bit of a blend, so that'll mix it with the colour underneath and make it not as vibrant and punchy anyway, just by doing that. And now I'll just add some browns on top, refine this eye some more, and then I can punch up that darker section for the oddly shaped pupil. You see that bit of brown on top calms that colour down. Haven't got something as rich, so as I said, I'm trying to make do the best I can. And also around the top of the paper, notice the marks I've made there where I'm testing out colours. Very often the colours in the sticks and the colours on the pencils don't look the same when you put them down as they do actually on the colour indicator of the pencils, or actually looking at the stick of the pastels. You think looking at the stick that it lay down exactly the same colour, but more often than not it really doesn't. Just wanted to quickly mention my Patreon channel for those looking for even more in-depth art instruction. It's packed full of pastel videos, oil videos as well, and those videos are being added to new ones every single month. I have videos for the complete beginner that have never done pastels or oils before with just limited supplies, and I take you from the very first blocking in all the way through to the final detailed drawings and paintings. I've also got some really unusual subjects as well, and in all of my videos I always take you through all the details. You see everything I do, how I create my work. But it's not just for beginners, it's also for novices, and I also show the best artwork that I've ever done as well. And this particular elephant video spans 6 hours, so you know you're going to see tons and tons of details, tips and techniques. And as mentioned, I've got lots of oil videos on there too, so there really is something for everybody, and you get access to hundreds of hours worth of videos for just $4. Now over 1,000 members strong. Hope to see you there soon. Now I'm really going to start to begin to add the texture on top of this initial layer. I'm just touching up a few of these sections on the edge. Not going to be much texture on that far right. That's where the subject's going back into the distance, so we've got a bit of a blur there. I like that, so I'm going to keep that there. But I do want to really add a lot more texture now on this area. You can see, so I've switched to a more of a sienna colour. Got the option to go a lot lighter. I can keep adding onto these layers. You can see I'm just doing small dashes. Remember to make your mark represent what you're seeing on the reference. Sometimes in video, if I've done the whole horse portrait, as I've already done one on my Patreon channel, then obviously if I was doing the mane, lots of flowing hair, I'd be using longer strokes. For short hair I use much smaller strokes. You can see here I've switched to a dark grey pencil. So be aware of the colour changes in the reference. Colour changes make the image or your drawing much more interesting for the viewer to look at, and I try and, you know, get as many colours in there as I can and still keep that realism. It's part of the fun, especially with pastels, to really look for all these fantastic colours. You may just see a little hint in there, and perhaps to try and push your boundaries a bit and get a few more colours in than you actually see in the reference. Like there, I can just see a hint of that kind of a plum colour, so I've popped some of that in there. Now this is still real time, so once again you can see I'm not really hanging about on this. It's kind of a study. It's going to be fairly realistic at the end, but I'm not trying to do an exact hyper realistic drawing of this. If I was, and I was just doing this section, I'd do it even larger. And that would save me sharpening pencils. Because if you wanted to put every tiny dot on, you'd have to have a very sharp pencil, and pastels don't hold their sharpness like a coloured pencil. Never will, and you'll never be able to sharpen a pastel like you can to that pinhead top like a coloured pencil. But with pastels we've got lots of bonuses, what I think are bonuses and benefits, where I can easily, or much more easily, create softer elements by blending with my finger and layering on top of each other. So I'm going to carry on now this refinement stage. As you can see, layer by layer and bit of detail by bit of detail, it all starts to come together. And as long as we don't put too much pastel down at the early stages, we can keep refining and refining. And because we've got that underlayer there, it makes it much easier for us to assess what needs to be altered to make it look even more like the reference photo, or even more like you want it to look. Because don't forget, we don't have to just copy reference photos and make things look like photos. We can have our own vision of what we want it to look like, but the layering allows us to make slight adjustments or even big adjustments, a step at a time, a stage at a time. You see, I'm keeping that right hand side nice and soft, and that's going to make the eye look even sharper and hopefully even more realistic. Going a bit lighter again on these strokes. I'm generally working dark to light. Keeping the pencils fairly sharp but not super sharp. I don't mind seeing a bit of a thicker line than I'm seeing on the reference photo. I don't mind it looking a little bit more textured in my drawing. And when you want it, you want your line to be slightly blended, softer. Blend it a bit with your finger, just touch it lightly. If you want that mark to stay and stand out a bit more defined, don't blend it with your finger. I know that sounds obvious, but sometimes beginners got a habit of blending everything all the time, and at the end of their drawing it can look very soft. And that's something I also see when people use velour or vela paper. It's naturally got this soft look to it, which is okay for some subjects, but other subjects have always got that bit of a fuzzy look to it, which I'm not that keen on myself, and the paper is then dictating in a way what your finished result is going to look like. Now I'm starting to put some real highlights on this, so it's a very light grey pencil. It's quite sharp as well. You see I'm using that glassine paper there, bottom right, to rest my hand on. And now at these more latter stages, now is really important to get that those marks following the direction of the hairs and fur. I think we'd call it horse hair, really. That's what's given us the shape, form, structure. And of course I got the option to go even lighter on top of this with a pure white if I want to. But I'm being a bit more careful now of the marks I'm making, because these are really going to show up in the finished piece. I'm not going to be doing too many more layers on top of this. Some lighter sections here as well. I can just lightly use the pencil to kind of glaze on top of the surface. Pushing a bit harder then where I want it to be really light, and lightly when I just want it to slightly lighten sections. Just put a bit of that pink pencil around the edge first on this white area. Then it's just basically blocking in with white, blending with my finger. So nothing complicated. It's only a bit of a white blaze across there. Now it's just a case of adding the amount of detail I want and refinement. There's not a great deal I want to do more on here. As I mentioned, I could spend another hour on here if I wanted to and go much more realistic. But sometimes I like these more painterly, looser look to things as well. So I don't always do subjects that's kind of hyper realistic. So it's basically from going fairly realistic, as I think this is, to something that's really photorealistic. It's more and more layers on top, more and more refinement, and it's up to you to decide the level that you want to do that with. Some subjects I get carried away. The small baby elephant that I did a while ago, I really wanted to challenge myself to see how photorealistic I could get that, so I spent about 20 hours or more on that and really pushed myself as much as possible. Other times I like to go much looser, and it's nice to have that bit of variety, so you're not always doing the same type of style all the time. Now I'm on the final stages. You can see I'm adding some more rich colour in various places here and there. Just bits that's making it more punchy in areas. But I'm quite happy with the way it's turned out. It's a study, so I've not gone too crazy on the detail, as I mentioned to you all. I really wanted to just get a representation of the drawing, and these final stages then, just as I mentioned, just punching up the colour, getting some of that richness back into the drawing that I'm seeing in the reference photo. I could have gone a lot lighter on the highlights around the eye and on that bottom section, but I wanted to get that a bit more texture in mine rather than that very bright light burnout effect. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you've picked up a few more tips, techniques, and you've got a bit more confidence if you're going to tackle a horse yourself. So I hope you've enjoyed part 2 of the Horse in Pastels workshop.